In this video, we will try to understand the tradition's understanding of morality. Specifically, how do we determine what we ought to do and ought not to do regarding sexuality through our understanding of our nature as human beings, or natural law, as described by St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas describes law as a certain rule and measure of acts whereby man is induced to act or is restrained from acting. It is important to understand that law, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is not interpreted as a restraint on an individual's freedom. Rather, law helps a person identify what is their best good, which leads to their greatest happiness. Due to our inclination to define our greatest good by our own measure, Aquinas asserts that we need law to assist us in identifying what is our actual greatest good. In order for something to be true law, then, Aquinas provides 4 criteria. Number 1, because we are human persons and we have the ability to use reason, the rule and measure of human actions, which is reason, then law has an essential relationship to reason. In other words, law must be a product of reason, not emotion or use of our sense appetites. Number 2, law must be directed by its nature to the good, especially to the universal or common good of the community. 3, law is addressed not primarily to private persons, but to the whole people meeting in common, or to persons who have charge of the community. And lastly, promulgation, or the application of the law, to whom it is applied, must be properly communicated. Aquinas recognizes 4 main kinds of law, 3 of which we will discuss in this session: the eternal law, the natural law, the human law, and the divine. The last 3 all depend on the first, but in different ways. Were we to arrange them in a hierarchy, eternal law would be at the top, then natural law, then human law. Divine law is not in conflict with natural law, but it reaches human beings by a unique route, through divine revelation. Let's talk about each law. Eternal law is identical to the mind of God, as seen by God himself. It can be called law because God stands to the universe, which he creates, as a ruler does to a community which he rules. When God's reason is considered as it is understood by God himself, in its unchanging eternal nature, it is eternal law. One could define it simply as the way God knows the universe to be. We can think about it this way. According to our Christian tradition, before God there was nothing. Therefore, everything that has come into existence has come into existence through the mind of God. As an intelligent creator, then, God would have the knowledge and understanding of the greatest end of everything in creation. Therefore, the way that God knows the world to be would be his eternal law. Divine law is derived from eternal law as it appears historically to humans, particularly through divine revelation. For example, sacred scripture. Divine law is divided into the old law and the new law. The old law and new law roughly correspond to the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. When St. Thomas Aquinas speaks of the old law, Thomas is thinking mainly of the 10 Commandments. When he speaks of the new law, he's thinking mainly of the teachings of Jesus. For Aquinas, the old law, primarily found in the scriptures of the Old Testament, commands conduct externally, reaches humans through their capacity for fear in the positive sense of avoiding actions that harm oneself or others. It forms behaviors through the promise of earthly rewards, by which Aquinas means the common good. While it affirms and reinforces the old law's emphasis on right action, the new law, found in the New Testament, focuses more on cultivating the internal dispositions needed for humans to emulate divine law. Consequently, promises focus on heavenly reward, that is, human beings' ultimate destiny, which is to eternally share in God's own nature. Next in our hierarchy of laws is natural law. Natural law can simply be defined as the human person's participation in God's eternal law, which, as I just explained, is the way God knows the world to be. And among all of God's creations, the human person's part in the eternal law is natural law. Most of creation actively seek their proper ends according to God's eternal law by instinct. However, human persons, given the gift of self-awareness and free choice, do not always act as we should or according to what is our greatest good or happiness, because we can be persuaded by our emotions and our physical appetites, which is why reason needs to be our primary source of law. Reason in human beings' capacity to comprehend certain principles implanted in our human nature. The first principle of the natural law is good is to be done and pursued and evil avoided. All other precepts of natural law rest upon this. What Aquinas seems to mean is that the precepts of natural law are specifications of this precept. Here's some other precepts of natural law. Whatever is a means of preserving human life and warding off its obstacles belongs to natural law. In other words, a good justification for a moral or legal rule is that it promotes the preservation of human life. Another, sexual intercourse, education of the offspring are precepts of natural law. In other words, a precept of natural law is the procreation of the species and the building of society through the education of children. And finally, corresponding our peculiar possession of reason, humans are under an obligation to avoid ignorance. In other words, they have an obligation to seek to know truth, that ultimate truth being God, and to avoid offending those among whom one must live. Now, what do these laws have to do with the church's understanding of sexuality? Well, Catholic theology of sexuality, like Catholic theology in general, is drawn from natural law, along with Scripture, and its interpretation by the magisterium of the Catholic Church. Sexual morality evaluates sexual behavior according to standards laid out by natural law. It provides general principles by which Catholics can evaluate whether specific actions meet these standards. According to the Catholic tradition, human life and human sexuality are inseparable. Because we believe God created human beings in his own image and likeness, and he found everything that he created to be very good, the church teaches that the human body and sex are likewise good. And what is good? Remember, good is that which conforms to the precepts of natural law. Remember the precepts of natural law that I just mentioned. Two of them were the preservation of life through the procreation of the species and the building up of communities. To keep in line with these precepts, the church teaches that sexual intercourse has a twofold purpose: unitive and procreative. Unitive means bringing people together in a bond of mutual love and stable commitment, the building up of society. Any sexual activity outside of marriage, regardless of the orientation, is always contrary to this purpose. These concerns, developed from teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, have led to significant teachings and interpretations for the magisterium of the Church. The final video will address these particular teachings and interpretations from the magisterium.